All right, good morning and welcome to the first Genealogy Circle meeting of 2023. I am Caprice DeLillo, and today my colleagues and I are going to be speaking about the available resources and researching here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library, State Library Resource Center. But before we do that, I have a couple of announcements. And ladies, make sure that you pick up, there's some handouts in the back of the room. Is that not on? Oh, okay. So I just want to say before we start, because this is both an in-person and a virtual program, we're going to hold off on answering questions until the end of the presentation. You can feel free, if you're attending virtually, to enter your questions into the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation in the order that they were received. Also, we are providing a copy of the slides and another handout that details provides more detail on the types of resources that are available in the Maryland department, which is one of the departments we're going to be talking about today. For those of you that are attending virtually, we are going to be putting a link to those in the chat. And of course, for those that are here, I think everybody's gotten them at this point, the handouts. Also, for those that are attending in person, we've got a few books in the back that are available for checking out if you're interested. But also, please be aware that there are other books down in the Social Science and History Department, as well as the Maryland Department and the African American Department that you can take a look at if you're interested. I also want to just remind everybody to complete the evaluation form. For those that are here in person, we've got copies of that on the table, of course, and then we're also going to be putting that link to that evaluation on in the chat, and we'll put it again at the end just so that you can get to it more quickly. We really do need these. We use these to not only plan for future programs, we take your suggestions and your recommendations very seriously, but we also use them to, prove to the folks that pay us that we are doing our job. So that's another really useful part about these evaluations. I also want to remind you that we conduct genealogy programs on a regular basis, and that you can find a list of upcoming programs on our website's events page at calendar.prattlibrary.org. On Saturday, April 8th, we are going to be holding our 2023 SLRC Annual Genealogy Lecture. This is going to be the first one that we're doing in person since the start of the pandemic. So we're really excited about that. We will also be live streaming it, but it will not be recorded. So if you're interested in attending, you'll need to either attend in person or attend online at the time that it's taking place. This is going to be an all-day event. If you are attending in person, lunch will be provided, and we'll also be raffling off a DNA kit. So again, those two perks are for folks who are attending here in person. The speaker is going to be Michael Lacapo. He is a retired veterinarian and a professional genealogist who's lectured internationally and written for a number of periodicals and journals. His research skills cover a broad range with specialties in German research, Mid-Atlantic American research, genetic genealogy, and advanced problem solving. However, the 4 lectures that he is going to be providing for us on April 8th deal with using social history to advance your genealogical research. We will also be having 3 additional genealogy circle meetings during the course of the year. These have not yet been finalized, so you can look for information on those later. And again, I want to encourage you to view our calendar page for upcoming programs at calendar.prattlibrary.org. There's a search feature, so if you want to search for genealogy programs, you can do that. It'll pull up a list of all of the programs we have upcoming. All right, so those are all the announcements that I have. We're ready to begin the presentation. So let me just make sure. Okay, having a little trouble here. Oops. Okay, well, all right. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Caprice DeLillo, and I'm the manager of the Maryland department here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. And I'm here today with some of my colleagues, Christine Eco, Meg Gers, and Eva Slezak from the African American department, the Periodicals Department, and the Social Science and History departments, respectively. And today we're going to be talking about the resources that you can find in the collections at the Enoch Pratt Free Library to aid you in your family history research. Okay, that's not working. But first, we're going to travel back in time a little bit and look at the Pratt Library's genealogy policy from 1935. So this is something that I found in my department's ephemera collection not long after I began in that department. And I think it's a great illustration of just how much our interest in genealogy has changed over the years. So this was the library's genealogy research policy, as I said, in 1935. And according to the policy, the American Library Association had conducted a survey of libraries and found that most found that it was inadvisable to devote any considerable amount of time to genealogical work or to specialize in genealogical departments or collections. Now, I bet if they conducted that survey today, things would be a little bit different. The policy then goes on to say that we do not buy books on genealogy, we don't maintain a genealogy department, and we don't have a trained genealogist on staff. So a lot has changed over the years. While we don't have one department still that is devoted solely to genealogy, we do have 4 departments with a wealth of genealogical material. We still don't have a professional genealogist on staff, but we certainly do have several genealogists who have spent many combined years researching and teaching genealogy. And though we can't conduct your research for you, we do assist folks with their research every day, and we conduct training sessions and other presentations, much like this one, of course. And lastly, we most certainly do purchase books related to genealogy. In fact, we have thousands of them in our collection. So just a little fun step back in time. Okay, so this is our agenda for the day. We're going to start with a brief discussion about some of the things that you should know before we move on to the various departments where my colleagues and I are each going to give a little bit of an introduction to the types of resources in our collections. Then we'll finish by talking about how we at the library can help you with your research, as well as the services that we provide. All right, so we're going to start, as I said, with just a few useful things that you should know before we start talking about all the fun stuff we've got. So the first thing I want to mention is, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but the Pratt's Central Library branch is the State Library Resource Center for Maryland. And what this means is the Pratt Library System in general, the library system for Baltimore City, but Central does kind of double duty. We also have state level functions as well. And we received this designation in 1971. And the reason that you should care about this is that along with the designation comes state funding. And that state funding provides us with money to purchase more books and other types of useful research materials, as well as allows us to travel around and provide programs and training to other libraries and organizations. Essentially, the reason that we have so many great resources here and so many great services is because of these additional funds. Okay, so I'm just going to start really quickly with some of the things that we don't have before we can, start to move into the things that we do have. So we don't have original vital records here on site. By those, of course, I mean the birth, the death, the marriage, the divorce, or adoption records. Anything like that you're going to find at the state archives. Of course, if you're looking for Maryland vital records, those are going to be at the Maryland State Archives, but most other states also have state archives, and generally that's where these types of government records are kept. We also don't have church records, except in one case, which we'll get to later. We don't have land or business records. Sensing a theme here. You also won't find any family trees in our collection. We do get asked about those quite often, but we don't have those here. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we do not have on-site professional genealogists. However, we are very well versed in helping genealogists, and we do know the resources. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Let's hold off till the end though, so that folks online can also hear the questions and the comments and things. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on now to where you should go. We're going to look a little more in depth at each of the 4 departments that I mentioned, where the resources are found, as well as the types of resources that we have. But before I start, I just want to say, and this may be obvious, but I still feel like it bears saying, that the resources that we're going to be sharing are not the only resources that we have here. These are just a sampling of some of the cool things that we have. We're really just scratching the surface here and just trying to give you an idea of the types of things that you can find. And as I hinted about earlier, although we don't have one genealogy department, we do have these 4 departments that are where the bulk of our materials are located. These are the African American Department, the Maryland Department, the Periodicals Department, and the Social Science and History Department. All 4 departments are located at Pratt's Central Library. And now I'm going to welcome Miss Christine Eco up. She's a librarian in the African American Department, and she is going to talk about the African American Department's resources. So you'll just want to use the arrows. The clicker isn't working.
20 instructional books on how to conduct genealogical research. It's worthwhile to look at them because they'll give you search strategies that'll help you to better find information that you're looking for. Such guides highlight records that some general books don't even include, and they also offer historical and cultural context, such as information on slavery, migratory patterns, naming practices, and African world. These books also generally offer case studies, which is basically the writer letting you know how they overcame a tricky research situation. And other topics that these books might include is improving family ties, health and pride, and also how to write and publish one's findings. If I had to recommend one for you to begin with, it would be Black Roots by the renowned genealogist Tony Burrows. In our vertical files, which are pictured at the top, and as well as our query files, which are pictured at the bottom, we have obituaries. Obituaries are basically placed in newspapers by the next of kin of a recently deceased person, and it lets the world know that the person has passed away. They contain basic facts, but they also sometimes contain a lot of information. You're going to find the parents' names, the siblings' names, the children's names, and at the minimum, you're going to find the place that the person was buried or the funeral home listed in the obituary. And in addition to obituaries in our collection, we also have in our vertical files, which is a subject file collection, we have information that might be pertinent to your family members, such as the profession that they worked in, or the neighborhood or an organizational affiliation. So you could look them up that way. And if the person was prominent, we probably even have a file dedicated to them. It's useful to still use these. I know the databases are popular now because you can keyword search, but especially in the case of the Baltimore Afro, there's a span from like 1988 to 2003 where they don't include it in the online subscription. So the collection in our department is still very relevant. And as you can see, I included funeral programs on the slide because we accept them. If you want to donate them, you're welcome to. And what we'll do is have them uploaded to the website Digital Maryland as part of a collection called African American Funeral Programs. We don't generally bring them out. The physical copies that we hold in the department for people to see will direct you to the website in order for you to view them. The next thing I want to tell you about are collective biographies. They're basically bring together people who generally have the same profession or maybe the same race or maybe live in the same geographic area, and they just provide biographies about them. The one that I'm most excited to tell you about is the Black Biographical Dictionaries from 1790 to 1950, because it's a collection of 300 books that feature over 30,000 people in this, both famous and everyday people. It's pictured, the index is pictured on the slide, and what you can do is go to the index and see if the person that you're interested in learning about has an entry, and if they do, you could pull out the microfiche. It'll point you to exactly what location to look for the microfiche in. And don't be turned off by the technology, because we have people in the African American department, and especially in the Periodicals Department, who will assist you with using the microfiche. We also have the collective biography, Who's Who Among African Americans, which began in 1976, and it's an annual one, and it's good for looking up everyday people as well. We have everyone from 1976 except for 2021, and 2022. And before that came Who's Who Among Colored Americans, and we have spotty coverage for that. It's basically 1926 to 1950. Within our department, we also have primary sources or transcriptions or reproductions thereof. The one I'm most excited to tell you about is the Sharp Street Memorial United Baptist Church records. They run from 1892 to 1974. And if you find a record on your family member, you'll walk away with their place of birth and death, cause of death, date of death, age at death, the undertaker, the place and date of burial, and a lot of pertinent information. And we have a lot of different slave narratives, and particularly we have the WPA narratives. I know they're available through the Library of Congress online, but some people still prefer to use the print, and we have the index for the print edition. The print edition is titled American Slave, and the index allows you to search by the name of the slave master, the name of the person being interviewed, the state or the county. Some of the other kinds of transcriptions we have are of emancipation records, free Negro registers, cemetery records, and marriage records, and we have some plantation journals as well. We have lots of histories, whether they be general, local, or family. And the ones that are pictured are the professionally published ones, but we also have some that are self-published in our ephemera collection. So feel free to ask us how to access the listing of our holdings for the ephemera collection. They're on our line under the locations tab on our African American Department webpage if you want to go and see what's available. As far as periodicals are concerned, the main two that are relevant are the Flower of the Forest Genealogical Journal, which primarily pertains to Maryland, and also the Journal of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. They have information such as research methods, histories, especially church histories, entries on what specific locales and organizations offer. They also have all kinds of transcriptions. They have family histories and ancestor tables and biographical sketches. I'll let you know that they are actually referenced, so you have to use them on site. And lastly is a resource that I'm beginning to get acquainted with myself. It basically covers petitions from the states of Maryland, Delaware, and the area of District of Columbia, as well as Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi, as far as the parts of the collection that we own. It's called Race, Slavery, and Free Blacks, and it covers freedom suits, the sale of slaves and runaways, and it also has information on the distribution of estates between family members. So, and also included are wills, inventories, and contracts. So it's a very good place to look after you've exhausted some of the more primary places that you should look first. And in order to see if something is relevant to you in this collection, you can go to the Digital Library on American Slavery through the UNC at Greensboro and keyword search to see if any of the cases have your person that you're looking for mentioned. And then you'll be able to search the microfilm from there. That's all I have for you. Next up is Caprice.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, so the Maryland Department. This is my home here at the library. So the Maryland Department has in our collection, of course, hundreds of indexes of Maryland records. I mentioned in the introduction that we don't have vital records, we don't have business records, we don't have church records. However, indexes may be the way to go to find that information. Indexes can do as the name suggests. They can index a particular resource or a particular institution and the resources that they have there, but also they often will contain the full records, which is great because this can save you a trip to a records repository. I've included some examples here on the bottom left of the screen, and you can find them for all different types of records. Things like vital records, as I mentioned, birth, marriage, and adoption, things like that. Church, land, estate records, military records, court records. The list is endless. We also have an enormous collection of city directories, phone books, and reverse lookup directories. So a lot of different types of directories. And although our directories collection is very Baltimore heavy, our collection does include directories for all over the state. The department also maintains a collection of over 2,500 maps and atlases. These date from the 17th century, so all the way back to 1630 up to the present. And of course, historic maps provide valuable clues when you're tracking your ancestors. Maps can identify ward numbers or election districts, and they can be used in locating census enumerations after 1870. They can also show neighborhoods, businesses, and schools, as well as relative proximity from an address to a place of work or worship. Atlases can take the research even further, right? So we hold atlases in our collection for Maryland counties in the late 19th and 20th centuries, and atlases will include more detailed information generally. So they may include businesses or residences, as well as, in some cases, landowners and the boundaries of their property. So if you're really lucky, you may be able to find your ancestors' land and how often do you get to see the actual boundaries delineated on a map or one of your ancestors' land. You can find even more details for a house in the what are referred to as the Sanborn maps. So these were fire insurance maps, and we do have access to these through the Pratt Library databases, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later. You can also find books on the history of events and places in Maryland. And of course, you can use these to fill in the story of your ancestors or to break through those brick walls when you're doing your research. Like the African American Department, we also have a subject and biography card index, or we have subject and biography card indices, as well as a vertical file collection. These materials use them every single day to answer questions, but they are also accessible to our customers. And we do have quite a few regulars that come in and use these. You're going to definitely want to familiarize with yourself with them if you have Maryland ancestors. The index contains over 350,000 cards on a variety of subjects and people. And these cards point to books, to periodical sources like newspapers and magazines, to state government documents, to the vertical files, of course. So you can find information about a variety of topics, everything from very broad topics like Maryland crime, to very narrow topics, like a particular business that existed maybe just for a very short period of time in Maryland. And because a lot of these topics are more sort of esoteric in nature, they're going to be things that you're not really going to find information about if you're just searching the library catalog, or even if you're using the internet and using a search engine like Google. Our vertical file collection contains files on over 7,000 different subjects. And some of these subjects we have multiple folders for. And these folders contain things like, periodical articles, so newspaper, magazine articles, as well as brochures, pamphlets, things like that. And both the card indexes and the vertical files are still updated. Okay, so family histories. We only began accepting donations of family histories within the past couple of decades. Before that, historically, we only maintained histories of prominent Maryland families, so families like the Calverts. However, as genealogy has grown in popularity, so has the desire to write and publish our own family histories. And so we've begun to receive more and more donations of these materials. We're happy to accept donations of family histories that have a strong Maryland connection. So if you are writing your own family history and it has to do with folks who have a Maryland connection, feel free to reach out to us. They can be self-published. They can be published by a small publisher. The only thing that we ask is that they be in bound form so that we can catalog them and place them on the shelf. And as is the case with a lot of the resources in the Maryland department. The family histories are generally non-circulating, so they have to be used within the library, but we are happy for you to make copies, take pictures with your smartphone. You're certainly welcome to to access this information and make copies of it. And then primary sources. We definitely do have quite a lot of primary sources in the Maryland department. We've got a collection of roughly 1,800 yearbooks for elementary through university schools throughout the state of Maryland. That's been built entirely through donations of personal or family yearbooks. And this is sort of where I usually put my plug in, where I ask for donations. So if you've got a yearbook, your own personal yearbook, or if you've got a family member and you're cleaning out their estate and you run across a yearbook, if it's for a Maryland school, we would absolutely love to have it in our collection. We've also purchased naturalization petitions, passenger arrival lists, and military service records from the National Archives on microfilm so that we can provide access to our customers here at the library. And we also have a collection of political campaign literature and other types of ephemera in our collection, as well as annual reports for local businesses and a lot more. Okay, I'm now going to turn it over to Meg Gers, the manager of the the Periodicals Department.
Okay, thank you very much. So my department is not so much about depth like the others, or breadth like the others, but depth. And so if you've already started your genealogical work, you're probably already pretty familiar with us. But I just want to point out some things as a refresher. So that URL you see on the screen, prattlibrary.org/city newspapers, will take you to an updated PDF list of the Baltimore City newspapers we have available on microfilm. As you can see, it's arranged alphabetically by title, with the dates we hold, the frequency, whether it's a daily, weekly, or monthly, and any kind of notes, such as whether there's a title change or something like that. So if you're just starting your research and you have family who are from Baltimore City, this is a very good place to start. And in answer to your unspoken question, no, it's not all online. Yes, we do have subscriptions to the Baltimore Sun and the Afro-American databases, but the Evening Sun, not available in the Baltimore Sun database, only on microfilm. The 5-star edition of the Afro, those of us of a certain age remember that. It ran from like the 1930s to the 1980s. That was the Tuesday edition, not included in the database. News American, our old friend News American, not on the database anywhere. It's only available on microfilm. The Baltimore City papers on film also include a lot of smaller papers which no longer exist and more specialized papers. Between the 1850s and the end of World War I, Baltimore had about half a dozen German language papers. They had a Polish language paper, a couple Italian language papers, specialized papers such as those dealing with temperance movement, women's suffrage. So all these things, if you're looking to do a little more in-depth research on your ancestors, you want to go beyond just the mainstream databases and look at these more specialized papers. We also have, under the URL prattlibrary.org/county newspapers, a nice listing, which is kept up to date, of all the Maryland county newspapers we have on microfilm. And it's arranged alphabetically by county and alphabetically by newspaper title within each county, plus the dates we hold, any notes about frequency, title changes, and that kind of thing. And these are very valuable because if you have family from Maryland, but not necessarily from Baltimore City, these newspapers tend to be smaller, more focused on covering the local community, and the stories of the people in the community is the news. So anniversary celebrations, lots of pictures, social clubs, meetings of different civic groups. Mr. and Mrs. Smith went and visited Mrs. Smith's married sister, Mrs. Jones. This is the kind of thing which constitutes news. So it's a really nice, I think, overlooked resource for getting information about your family members. Okay, other kinds of stuff you can find in our newspapers. Anniversary celebrations. And if you look at the screen here, you see in the right-hand area that picture of the family gathering. They're celebrating this couple's jubilee. And so not only do you have a list of the various family members, but a really nice photograph of the different generations. Birth notices, pretty self-evident. Divorce cases. Now, this is quite interesting. We have on microfilm the complete run of the Daily Record, which is a Baltimore City legal paper. In the days before no-fault divorce in the 1970s, if you wanted a divorce, you had to sue for it in court, and that would be reported in the Daily Record. And that's a great source. So if you know if someone in your family had a divorce, it would say who the two parties were, when they were married, how long they lived in Baltimore City, the reason for the divorce. So again, a nice sort of overlooked resource. If your family had a business which went under, the dissolution of the business will be reported in the Daily Record. Land sales and legal notices. So-and-so's farm was bought by another person. Passenger list. Now, between, again, about the mid-19th century and till the end of World War I, there was a regular traffic between Baltimore and Bremen, Germany, because there was a huge German language population in Baltimore. And so the papers would publish a list of the passengers on the steamship line going back and forth between Bremen. And sometimes you can find nice little nuggets. You know, Mr. Helmut Schmidt and his family are returning to his birthplace in Munich for a short visit. So right there, just a little few lines, you can get some valuable information about a family member. Society pages, you don't see that much anymore, but if you happen to be of the upper crust, they're a great source for pictures. Wedding announcements, oftentimes you get not only a picture of the bride, but also in the listings of the wedding party, names of different relatives. And finally, our old friends' marriage and death notices. And again, in the county papers, death notices tend to be a little more elaborate and in-depth and longer. So if you have a relative who, say, lived in the county, by all means, look in the city newspapers like The Sun, which covers the state of Maryland, but also don't hesitate to look at some of the county newspapers as well. Okay, some other things to think about when you're using our newspaper collection. There's several different features of newspapers besides the usual suspects, which you might want to consider. The Baltimore Sun series Maryland Heraldry, which ran from 1905 to 1908, and which was really the first effort to sort of do a consistent, concentrated history of prominent Maryland families, like the Calverts and so on. The Baltimore Sun series Man in the Street, which looks at the origin of the people behind street names and park names in Baltimore cities. And finally, things like editorials, human interest stories, feature stories about different neighborhoods. These, again, are very valuable for giving you information about where your ancestors lived and how they lived. And as an example of how the newspaper kind of helped fill out a story, a person was looking for a death notice for a family member. She didn't really know much about him. She had heard from family lore he died in, quote, an industrial accident. Not really clear about what exactly happened. Found the death notice, very terse, just said this person died suddenly, and that was it. So I thought, well, that's not very helpful. So I decided to look at the newspaper, the news part of the section where the obituary occurred. And sure enough, on page 3, a little story about a man who was working on one of the skyscrapers in downtown Baltimore who was hit by a falling girder. So there you have the filling in of the gap of the story. Now she knew exactly what had happened. Okay, so not only newspapers, Maryland County and Baltimore City, but we also have on film historic newspapers from around the world, our genealogical microfiche collection, and our out-of-state city directories. Now, again, not Maryland or Baltimore city directories. These are out-of-state city directories that were filmed some time ago and put on microfiche. So I'm going to show you some examples. So the genealogy and local history collection is just that. I think it was issued sometime in the 1970s. There is an index to it in the Periodicals Department, which is indexed by family name and by state and by locality. And these are just little self-published, very small published local histories and family memoirs. For example, the genealogy of the Mittong family, who I believe are from West Virginia, And this is kind of nice. It came out, I think, in the 1920s, and you see from the very rather dark photograph a picture of some of the family members of different generations. So it's not just a listing of names and dates, but actually you see what some of these people look like. To the left of that, Conewago, a collection of Catholic local history. Conewago is in Pennsylvania. I believe the current population is a little over 7,000. So if you're looking for local history about that, you probably won't find that in too many Maryland libraries. You probably won't find that even too many Pennsylvania libraries. But again, because this collection kind of gathers these things together, these almost ephemeral documents, and makes them available to people. To the left of that is a city directory from the city of Newburyport, which is where my mother's family is from, which is why that's up there. Again, Baltimore City, Maryland directories would be in the Maryland department. But if you, like me, have family from out of state, you might want to take a look at some of these things. And actually, I did find a lot of people with my mother's surname in there. And you could find out, for example, where they lived, what their professions were. So a nice little resource. And finally, to the far left of the screen, you'll see that newspaper with the headline, Victory in Europe. That is from our filmed collection of the Manchester Guardian from Manchester, England. We have it from about 1945 through the 1980s. We have the London Times from the 1780s into the 20th century. And finally, the Virginia Gazette. That is probably the oldest of all the newspapers we own on film. We have that from 1736 to 1776. The Maryland newspapers we have, a few of them do go back to the 18th century, but usually they begin around the 1770s. So, don't just confine yourself to what's in the databases, but also, kind of be willing to expand your search a little bit and take advantage of these other resources that we have. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Eva of our Social Science and History Department. You?
Okay. Everyone and every family has a story to tell. How and where do you find information? How do you organize your findings? Dates, places, names, etc. Well, you come to the Social Science and History Department, where we can advise you and show you a variety of resources to help you in your quest, regardless at which stage of research you have attained. Whether you're just beginning, you already have some information and need to fill in the blanks. As many have discovered, you are never completely finished. Some call that a curse, some call that a blessing. There is always more to be found and more questions to be answered. And so let me share with you some of the resources and types of resources we have to help you in your quest. You have basic guides, a variety of those at different stages. Some are broad and just in general to get you started. Others are more specific in researching and go into detail, providing information on sources. And one of those sources to help you in your search are names. Names, they can also be first names, or they call them, and they can provide key information and insight. There are scholarly dictionaries here, which gives you not only the name, that could be a clue also in helping with focusing on a time chart. There are also less formal texts, but they can help place the names as well in the time, geographic areas, along with his name. There are also nicknames and spellings and variations that can provide a clue as to the origin, which nationality might spell it a particular way. As you can tell, that's just one section of one shelf, and there are hundreds and hundreds of volumes that we have in our storage area, but readily available for use. There are passenger ship lists that have been indexed. These are listings, and it's a good guide to published records. And the volumes, in one instance, it mentions that these volumes provide information on more than 4 million immigrants. And that came to the New World between the 16th and mid-20th centuries. So they provide information that you might not be able to find any longer on your in other areas. They include harbors from all over the country. It's not limited to Maryland, although it does pick up some Maryland as well. So you have Texas, New York, West Coast, and other parts of the country. In one case, for the genealogical biographical directory that's listed on here, there are 100, close to 200 volumes of just biographies. And there's several sets like that. Some of those may have been digitized and available through online resources, but not always. Not always. Something else that is helpful are historical archives from different states, organizational ones. These can include military organizations, social organizations, fraternal groups. We've got who's who, international, American. We have some Canadian information. You have current biography that goes back to the 1940s. Different what I would call local publications that are not always picked up by general indexes. So if you have a particular area you're interested in, we can check on what we might have that fits that geographical area. Another source that people tend to forget because it's items rather than books or paper are memorabilia that you may find in your family holdings. There might be flags, coins, ribbons, decorative ribbons. Sometimes these may be organizations, medals, insignia, and so on. And we do have books that identify coins when they were minted, history of it, where they were perhaps more prominent, how they were used. And it's not limited to American coins either. So you might find coins from other parts of the world. Flags, again, not just the state and national flags, but other types of banners and flags that might have been created throughout the history. And we have books to complement this in the sense of helping you learn how to preserve the information and perhaps even places where to go to identify or how to identify the particular items. Local histories. We have tons and tons of local histories, and they're absolutely fascinating because these are written often in the time that it occurred or close to the time that it occurred. And it gives you a sense of that area, of that time, and helps to perhaps explain some stories you have heard from your family. We have local histories on states, towns, regions, overseas, as well as American, Canadian, Mexican, you name the country, except for Antarctica, except in those cases, there's more exploration, and that also can provide additional source information. Historical societies, again, there's a centennial of some town or a local celebration of some sort. They issue a book, and that talks about the founding of the area, the prominent families. There are diaries, journals, autobiographies, memoirs. All of these add to it. Some have indexes and some do not. And perhaps those that are of more value because you're reading through it and living through that time period and getting the flavor of what life was like. Regimental histories. We have a lot of books that deal with the different wars, the different conflicts. But to supplement that, we also have some diaries, again, and journals. It's a mix sometimes of what one would call secondary sources, like a history of perhaps, it's an example we have of the Civil War, and in the appendix, you find the rosters for particular units, which would be primary source material. So don't neglect the secondary sources. They often will lead you to primary sources that might give you the information that you need. Also, they give accounts of engagements that you might not find because it's from that person's view of what they experienced. And those are not always in the formal records. And it gives you insight into that time period, that individual's experience. Terminology pops up in these because you gain a whole new vocabulary. So when you're searching for information, that terminology that was used at that time period might be the key that you need to get to records and identify records that you need. And as you see here, we have a secondary source in a way on how to find records in World War II. And they do include terminology as well as pages of insignia, medals, and so on to help identify those items. Atlas and gazetteers. There again, lots and lots of those, and some are fairly heavy and big and fascinating by all means. When I checked the catalog to see what would come up under gazetteers, I found, just for our department, over 200 to 600 entries. That's a lot of material to go through. But these, again, vary in time and amount of information that they can give you. One of the most fascinating, again, and very resourceful is the gazetteer, the pronouncing gazetteer. This gives you a listing of not only place names, such as cities, but towns, in some cases, railroad stops, rivers, mountains. And as you know, names can change and sometimes disappear. So when you run across references to certain places that you cannot locate on maps today, this is a good source. These older gazetteers will help provide that. And they give very detailed information as to how many degrees north, how many degrees south, east, west, nearest, sometimes postal station, because that's where people would pick up their mail and goods. Sometimes they include, some of these gazetteers include maps where they indicate structures. They have illustrations. An example in the upper left hand is an illustration in Connecticut that went around the border of a map of Connecticut, identifying certain structures that then can lead to additional in doing your research. These maps that are sometimes included include illustrations of businesses as well, sometimes even listings of prominent individuals or churches, schools, and so on. There are more recent compilations that assist, such as the Second World War, maps that are related to the campaigns. Historical maps of America that help to explain perhaps how areas developed. They provide travel routes, transportation, types of transportation, and areas of that type. Population information. Again, sometimes they list prominent businesses, families, local families' names, so to help you come to identify, again, areas that might be helpful in your research. And so we will now proceed to how we can help you. We have learned about the different departments, and now to continue your research.
Okay, so as Eva said, after talking a little bit about the 4 different departments and the types of resources that you can find there, we want to make sure we also cover some of the other resources that we provide access to, or other services that we provide. So starting with web guides. So the librarians here at the State Library Resource Center have created some really useful web guides, which you can access at the URL provided. There are quite a few that are devoted to genealogy and history, and you can also find our genealogical research guidelines there as well. You can also access our subscription databases through our website if you have a library card. And of course, if you don't have a library card, what are you waiting for? You can get one very easily, whether it's in person or online. If you're not interested in coming into the library, but you want to use our databases, you can just go to prattlibrary.org/ecard, sign up for a card, and immediately start using these databases. We have dozens of great databases, but some of the ones that you would be of interest to if you're doing genealogical research are, of course, your Ancestry Library Edition and your Heritage Quest. These two databases aren't unique to us here at the Pratt. Heritage Quest is available at all public libraries in Maryland. And if you don't already have a subscription of your own, you can probably access Ancestry at your local library if it's not the Pratt. However, we also provide access to some of the other databases that are listed here on the screen. Fold 3, which is only available in a select few Maryland public libraries. And this is a great resource for military records. You can also access the Sanborn Maps database for maps in Maryland and Washington, D.C. We have a subscription to this database, and we only subscribe to the Maryland and Washington, D.C. Maps, although they do exist for other cities as well. You'll only find those on this database. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Sanborn Maps on the next slide. We also provide access to historic newspaper databases for papers that have been digitized and are available in this format. They are available primarily through ProQuest, and we also have access to newspapers.com, which you can access through our website, which includes even more digitized titles. I think, Meg, you wanted to mention something else about these. I can actually even bring this to you. You wanted to add something?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to draw people's attention to the fact that not only do we have in historic newspapers, the mainstream papers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, but a lot of African-American newspapers too, like the Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier. So please don't overlook those. Those can be very valuable resources. Newspapers.com, I love, but just remember the coverage can be a little bit spotty. It does overlap a little bit with some of the county papers we have, some of the smaller papers, but I have found oftentimes when I'm looking for a particular date, that tends to be the exact point and where there's a gap in coverage in that database. So by all means use it, especially if you're looking for out-of-state newspapers, but don't forget there are more complete runs of the local newspapers in the Periodicals Department on film.
Oh, and just if you're interested in seeing a full list of our databases, you can go to prattlibrary.org/databases. And as I previously mentioned, but it bears repeating, if you don't have a library card, you can get one very quickly, prattlibrary.org/ecard, and then you can just click right on through from our webpage to any of the databases that interest you. So I mentioned the Sanborn Maps database. This is a really cool resource. If you haven't heard of Sanborn Maps before, these were created during the 19th and 20th centuries for fire insurance purposes. Insurance companies would use them to assess their total liability in urbanized areas of the United States. However, others quickly discovered their usefulness in research, and they began to proliferate throughout universities, libraries, and other types of research institutions. These maps contain detailed information about properties and individual buildings, and they are much more zoomed in at roughly 50 feet to 1 inch than most other types of maps. And the large scale allows you to see so much more detail than we're used to in maps. These were published in multiple volumes of binders that included several plates in each one of the binders. And of course, larger cities like Baltimore would have multiple volumes. Some of the smaller cities maybe would only have 1 volume or 2 volumes. Now, as you can see from the example here on the slide, not only are streets and buildings represented, but you can also see the names of buildings. We have a business college up on the top left with a dancing academy below it. The Basilica Cathedral is off to the right. And the original Central Library branch is on the bottom left there. So you can see that the facade for the original Pratt Central Library was actually on Mulberry Street rather than on Cathedral Street, and we didn't have the whole block like we do now. So it's hard to see because it's a little small on the slide, but it also includes codes that are details about the construction of the buildings. So is the building made out of stone, brick, concrete? You can also find architectural features. Does it have a balcony, a chimney, an attached garage? How many stories is it? And most of the buildings that you see that don't have their name marked on them will have a D, in most cases a D, which stands for dwelling. So these are the residences. There is a key that exists to interpret the codes, and there is a link to that key within the database. And these maps are great for genealogists because you can use them to do things like figure out the closest school or church to a particular address, maybe find out where your ancestor went to school or went to church, and then you can maybe have an easier time tracking down those records. As mentioned earlier, the library does have a subscription to the Sanborn maps for just the Maryland and DC areas. But if you're looking for these maps in other areas, you should be aware that there are some available online that have been digitized. The Library of Congress has a pretty good selection of them, although they don't have as comprehensive of a selection of Maryland Sanborn maps. They do have them for other cities as well. And as far as I know, the Pratt Library is the only public library in Maryland that has access to this database. So this is a really fantastic resource. Digital Maryland is another resource that you should check out. Digital Maryland is a collaborative statewide program that is headquartered at the Pratt Central branch that works with libraries, archives, museums, and other types of institutions to digitize and provide access to online content for free. You can find maps, you can find photographs, manuscripts, books, oral history interviews, all different types of materials that document aspects of Maryland history from its inception to today. And you can access the website from the URL that's provided there. There are almost 150 collections available. So here you can see some examples of some of the things that you can find: photographs, maps, letters. You can even see a marriage certificate towards the center of the screen there. And one of the funeral programs that Christine talked about during her portion of the presentation. Again, as she mentioned, this is where the digitized funeral programs from the African American collection are kept. And as I said, again, this is free. All of the access to this is free. We also provide free programs around the state. So since the onset of the COVID pandemic, many of our programs have been held virtually. However, we're still doing programs in person, as you can see here today. We also hold our annual genealogy lecture series in the spring. I mentioned that in the introduction, but I'm going to mention it again. This is an all-day event, and we feature nationally known speakers. Our 2023 lecture series is going to be held on April 8th. And we'll feature Michael Lacapo. He's going to provide 4 lectures on the use of social history in researching your ancestors. And this is the first one that we're doing again in person. We'll be holding it here at the Central Library location, but we will also be streaming it live online. We also hold 4 genealogy circle meetings each year, of which this is one of them. This is the first one. And at these, we usually include presentations by local presenters or sometimes presenters on staff here at the library. let's see. And as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, you can find these events on our website at calendar.prattlibrary.org. You can also ask to be added to our genealogy program email list if you're interested in that. We send out emails about upcoming genealogy programs that are available to you. Some of them are virtual, but also some of them are in person. We definitely stick to just emailing about programs. So we won't spam you with this email list. If you're interested in being added to that list, there's a slide at the end of the presentation that has an email address and a phone number. You can always reach out to us and we're happy to add you to that list if you're not already on it. We also offer our services to genealogical and historical societies, clubs, senior centers, and other organizations. So if you're a member of or work for one of these organizations, feel free to reach out to us and we can send you a list of available programs. And again, you can reach out to us using this email that is upcoming on the last slide. And then, of course, if you're looking for help with your research, we can do that too. Although we can't do your research for you in the same way that a professional genealogist would, we do know the resources pretty well. And so we're happy to assist you. We can do lookups for you if you know that we have a resource that you're looking for and you can't make the trip down. You can also, of course, come in. You can call us, you can email us, you can snail mail right to us if you want. We're happy to send scans or printouts of materials to you. And then for more information on all of this, you can check out our genealogy guidelines. We talk there about, we give another overview of the 4 different departments and the types of resources we have, as well as contact information for those departments, as well as guidelines on just how many questions you can ask per month, whether there's a cost or not, which, by the way, there's no cost for the research. There's only a cost if you want things mailed out to you. So definitely encourage you to check that out as well. And this is the end of our presentation. So these are our names, our departments. Like I said, here's contact information. We definitely have time for questions. But I just want to encourage you, if you think of a question at a later date that you don't think of today, we are more than happy to answer those questions. You can reach out to us either by phone or by email. If you want to be added to the list for upcoming programs where you receive emails alerting you to these, or if you're interested in having us come out and speak to you at your organization or club or wherever, feel free to reach out to us. So I'm going to start with if there are any questions in the audience, and if there are, I'm actually going to bring the microphone over so that folks who are online can hear that. Does anybody have any questions here? And Bill, I don't know if you want to reiterate what you said earlier. No? Okay. Anybody have any questions that are here? Okay.
Just a technical thing.
Oh, okay.
What size scanner do you have?
Oh boy.
I mean, can you do something that's 11 and a half by 7?
So we have scanners in the various departments that are basically Xerox copier size. If you want something larger than that, we do have a digitization department. Now, they're not a public department, and they do have projects that they're working on. Digital Maryland is primarily what they're responsible for. So they have projects in queue. But if you do have something that you want digitized, we can refer you to them, and they can let you know whether it's something that they can do or not. If you, like I said, if you want something that's larger than, say, a Xerox copier machine size. Yeah. Anybody else here have any questions? No? Okay. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like the funeral programs, to what level does your online catalog cover things in the, like, for example, if I knew the name of someone who had a funeral card, would I find that in the card catalog? Or would you have to
No. Yeah, you would have to go. So our departments, especially the African American department and the Maryland department, and obviously some of the resources in the periodicals department, we have a lot of ephemera type collections that are not in the catalog because there's so many little bits and pieces, you know. If there's an index that exists for that particular collection, then, you know, we would know in the department and we could let you know. So you're welcome to call us if you've got something that you're interested in and you wanted to know if there was an index for it or not. But most of these things are not in the catalog, and certainly not to the level that you're talking about, where if you wanted to like search for an individual's name, yeah, that wouldn't be something you could do from the catalog. Are there any questions online, JP, that you see? No questions? Okay. Mm-hmm.
You could do some of that searching online for a name
Mm-hmm.
in Digital Maryland or other, like, and in the funeral programs. But, you know, that's right, based on the number of programs there.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, you don't get a huge database, like, you know, millions. You get thousands.
Right. Right. And of course, it depends on the collection. So, like, for instance, the funeral programs have been digitized and are on Digital Maryland, but, you know, our yearbook collection in the Maryland department has not been digitized and is not available, and there's no index to it. So it really just depends on the resource itself. Yeah. Yeah. So it's always best to just kind of reach out to us and we can let you know. Okay. Well, I guess that's it. Like I said, just want to reiterate one more time, if you think of a question after the fact, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer those questions. Thank you.